opportunity to spend time with one another and get reconnected with one another so that we can minister to one another. Also to hear your word and to be challenged in how we live, the choices that we make, the way that we walk. In the name of Christ we pray. The church said. It was somewhere during the 11 years of ministry before I arrived at First Christian Church of Chicago. I had finished preaching that Sunday morning, and I was standing at the door, shaking people out as I normally did. And somebody came up to me and said, "Good sermon, preacher." And without thinking, my response was, "So what are you going to do about it?" I remember telling that story here about 10 years ago. And one of our elders, after I had told that story, met me back at the back door and said, "You really didn't do that, did you?" And I said, "Yes, I did." And it really reflected my ideal of what preaching ought to have happen. That preaching ought not to be that we leave feeling like we are more educated. We should feel like we are more educated in the sermon, but that's not the result that ought to happen. You see, preachers should not just preach for information purposes. Preachers should preach for transformation. Preachers should preach for life transformation. People ought to be different because of the message that they've heard. Jesus preached that way. And when we get to chapter 7, we understand that Jesus is making that very point when he gets to the last part of chapter 7, when he's pushing along and saying, "Okay, now what?" The Sermon on the Mount requires a response. It was not a message that would allow people to just leave without requiring change of how they would live, what they would think, how they would feel, what they would choose. Imagine you're taking a journey. Imagine I'm getting ready to go visit Tim and Tiara and the grandkids in Washington. And I have my bags packed and I load them into the car, and Elizabeth's going to take us to the airport. Well, the airport's too far away. Just take me down to Dunkin' Donuts. Let me get a few donuts, and then we'll call it that trip. Does that get me to my desired destination? No. Why not? Because Dunkin' Donuts leaves about 1,200 miles to go. Okay, say we go ahead and have Elizabeth take us to the airport. She drops us off, and I decide to go, or we go up to Alaska Air and say, "I need a plane ticket. I need a pair of plane tickets." And then the person will ask, "Where do you want to go?" And my answer is, "Oh, just give me any ticket. It doesn't matter." Will I get to my desired destination? Probably not. Chances are one in every ticket or every destination that they have, whether I will get to where I want to go. Probably not. Well, I go ahead and I need a ticket to Seattle, Tacoma. And they give us our tickets, they issue the tickets, we get them, we make our way through security. It was a drag. The line was backed way up, it was moving slowly, we're just tired as we get up to security, and we have to take off our shoes and put them back on, and all that rigmarole and security stuff. And so our tickets are stamped B22. And there's we're tired. So we figured B is That sounds good. It's right there. Are we going to get to where we desire to go? No. We're going to miss it by at least 21 gates. All right, we go ahead and we buck up with that last bit of energy, and we go ahead and walk down to gate 22, and we arrive at gate 22, and we're a half hour to spare, and they're loaded. They're calling last call for this plane that's in the gate right there, and we decide, okay, there's a plane here. Let's get on the plane. Are we going to get to where we desire to go? It depends on if that's the plane that we're getting on or not. Whether that's the Seattle-Tacoma plane or that's the plane just before we're supposed to get on. You see, as we're going through that, there's a whole lot of different places where we can keep from getting where we desire to go. There's a whole lot of places where there can be detours or sidetracks from keeping us from seeing Timothy and the family. And it's only in taking the care to make sure that we do the right choice at each of those junctures that we actually get to where we desire to go. Jesus says this in the Sermon on the Mount. Enter by the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. A little later, he changes the metaphor to a building metaphor, and he shares, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who builds his house on the rock, and the rains fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand, and the rains fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. The Sermon on the Mount is a kingdom manifesto. It begins with Jesus defining what those who belong in the kingdom will look like. They are pure in heart. They are poor in spirit. They are peacemakers. He continues on with our kingdom mission and saying, we have a shared mission of being people who preserve our world, who transform our world by our very presence, invite others into the kingdom. He talked about the kingdom and how we live with one another and how it bears out the Old Testament by, you've heard that it was said, but I say unto you, saying, it's not about exactly what you do, but how you feel about it, what's going on in your heart. It's not just about the rigid following the rules. He talks about how we practice our religion in front of others, whether it's to show off or whether it's to be seen by God. He talks about our worry and anxiety, talking about, are we really trusting God? Is God big enough to deal with the issues of our life? Or do we feel like we've got to help God along? And that we need other gods to do that? He tells us, don't judge one another. Don't place condemnation on one another. And then he tells us, trust God. God gives you good stuff. So when you pray, trust that God will always remain better than other people. But that we ought to treat each other the way God treats us. Better than we deserve. And then he comes to these verses. And in these verses he begins to say, you've heard what I said. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? As citizens of the kingdom, we have a journey to take. home to build. And the way that we journey and how we build have everything to do with the destination which we desire to arrive at. What choices will you make on your journey? And how we build. As we look at these two metaphors, a series of twos pop up. The first of those twos is two doors, or two gates. And the door or the gate is where you begin. And where you begin matters. Where you start from really matters. Jesus is telling you, here's a wide gate. There's no obstructions. It's easy to get into. Or there's a narrow gate. Elsewhere, he talks about a narrow gate. He talks about the gate. He's talking with the disciples after the rich young man had come by and said, I want to get into heaven. And he says, well, sell everything you have, give to the poor, follow me. He leaves sad, and he's talking with the disciples afterwards, and the disciples are despondent because rich people, those are the most righteous people that there are. Or at least that was the conception in the Jewish mind, that if you were rich, it demonstrated God's blessing on you. And Jesus' response was, it's hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God, just as hard as it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle, which is a narrow gate in Jerusalem that would have had a turn in it to make it difficult for those things to occur. It was a walking gate, and you couldn't get animals through. It's difficult with all of our other stuff, and where the world says, here, begin here, make this your priority, start with this. This is what really matters. Start with your job. Your job is what is really important. Once you get your job in line, then you can worry about moving on to other stuff. You see, what we have, one of the things that we have is that 7 out of 10 high school students, when they graduate from high school, leave the church. We've seen that here, but that is not just an issue here. That is a national epidemic that has occurred for the last 50 years. And they leave the church, and most of them don't return until their mid-30s. The reason why is they've got so many other things to do before they get back to their faith. I've got to start my job. I've got to build my career. I've got to start my family and get my family established. And then once my children get old enough, then they may need religious education, and I'll come back to church. You see, it matters where you begin. And what is this narrow gate that Jesus is talking about? Well, the other time where Jesus mentions a gate between the time where he's talking about the narrow entrance, the eye of a needle, and this time is where Jesus says, I'm the door, I'm the gate for the sheep. They enter through me. See, the starting point is we've got to start with Jesus. We've got to start there. That has to be the foundation. That has to be the point of initiation. When we don't begin with Jesus, we begin on the wrong foot. We make a false start. We don't get headed in the right direction. So we have to begin with Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy laid before him suffered on our behalf to bring us redemption. We begin with him and what he's done for us. But then there's another pair. There's two directions. Two directions. There's the wide path, there's the narrow path, there's the easy way, there's the hard way. And choosing the right path is essential. You see, your building is only as strong as the foundation. In the story of the builders, the context there, as we look at it, the issue there, the difference, the significant difference is the foundation upon which each chooses to build. One chooses to build on sand, one chooses to build on bedrock. The one who builds on sand sees his work collapse. The one who builds on red bedrock sees his work stand. In 2008, the Millennial Tower was built in San Francisco. Just 10 years ago. And the construction, they figure in that an average construction during the 50-year life of a high-rise building will be about 10 inches of sinkage. And that's the 50-year life of a building. What's happened to the Millennial Tower in 10 years is it has sunk 17 inches and tilted 14. What we have in the making is another Leaning Tower of San Francisco. Another building was built right next to it. Nothing has happened. It's sitting, it's stable. The difference is the bedrock for the Millennial Tower was 300 feet deep. And they decided that we don't need to go 300 feet deep to establish the piering of this building. We're going to go about 200 feet, and about 200 feet is compacted sand. And so they sunk their piering into compacted sand and said, that's plenty enough. The building next door went down the 300 feet and established itself in the bedrock. Millennial Tower is now in the place of having to go through a several million-dollar project to go and to figure out how can we, after the fact, put piering in a building to get down to 300 feet and establish it into bedrock. And it's become a problem. It's easy before the building's constructed to be relatively easy. But once the building is there to drill down 300 feet and to establish new piering, it has become a problem. And many of the people who bought multi-million-dollar condos in this building are having to sell them at 25% of the purchase price. Because nobody really wants to move into a building that's that's sinking and beginning to tilt over. You see what the issue there is the foundation. When the foundation's bad, there's a problem. Your building is only as strong as your foundation. And the context is here, is building down either in sand or doing the hard work to establish yourself in solid bedrock. Where is your foundation? You see, there are those who can say, my foundation is Jesus. Jesus is solid. Jesus is secure. But just 2 weeks ago, Tess preached a message that said something about those who would say to me, Lord, Lord, didn't we do all of this marvelous stuff in your name? And his response is, who are you? Have we met? I mean, the real tenor of his response is, we don't have an intimate relationship with one another. We have been on passing terms. We are mutual acquaintances, and that is as far as it goes. You see, sometimes as believers, we can say we're built on Jesus, we live on Jesus, our foundation is on Jesus, except our foundation is shallow. Our foundation is not established in the bedrock. We know about Jesus. We know some information about him. We may even call him Lord, but our lives don't exhibit it. There's another pair. There's two crowds. The wide gate with the easy way, guess what? Everybody's flocking to that one. And there's a narrow gate with a hard way. Few it's interesting that he says that few find it. And he's talking about, the flocking and the crowds to the large gate, but few find it. Jesus is very clear about what that way is. He is. Few find it. There's been, George Barna has done a series of studies over the last 30 years. And one of the things that he's found is that even in Sunday morning church attendance, roughly half of the people in a given church on any Sunday morning, 40 to 50%, actually live a life that validates their Christianity. That believe things biblically and live it out in any real way. You see, the issue here is about effort. The easy way, it's easy. I can do it without trying. It doesn't cost me a thing. It's simple. It's not demanding. I can easily do it, and so I can fit it into all of the rest of my life, and it doesn't impinge upon the things that are otherwise important to me. It's easy. It's like changing my shirt. I just unbutton, take it off, put another one on, and button down. I'm all set. It's easy. When that's the demand of Christianity, we're missing something. John Bunyan, in his book Pilgrim's Progress, establishes a picture here of here's these people who were mass crowds, nice, smooth road, easy transportation, wide, and everybody's flocking to that path. And he sees another road, narrow road, difficult, climb up a hill, exhausting just looking at it. And the temptation is to take that easy road that everybody else is taking because the demands are so simple. Sometimes we fall into that, don't we? Sometimes we take and we fall into that. His yoke is easy, his burden is light. So that must mean that I can take the easy way. I can take the way that's not a demand, that doesn't have anything, that doesn't call for anything from me. And we miss the point of what he's saying there. He's saying that in contrast with the other thing, the consequences of other things that bear you down over time, I offer you grace that lifts the burden from you. But in the story of Pilgrim, as he's making that journey, he's looking there and he decides, I'm not following the crowd. I'm taking the hard way. And he's climbing that hill, and he's got this pack of burden on his shoulders. And the pack of burden is weighing him down, and he's beginning to faint. He's beginning to feel like there's nothing, I can't make this anymore. I can't make it up this hill. The journey is too difficult. I've quit. I'm about ready to quit. And God, please help me. And the burden falls off his back and rolls down the hill. You see, the easiness is found in it delivers us from the burdens that we carry. But it doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's simple. It means it's a relief from all of the burdens that we carry otherwise in this world. It's a source of refreshment. What characterizes these two traveling parties? One is the effort they put forth or not. You see, digging down to bedrock takes hard work. Just sticking it in the sand, not quite so much. It's how much effort you put. But it's also the wisdom they practice or not. The wisdom they practice or not. You see, it's a wise and foolish builder. What's the same? Both of them are building a house. Both of them choose a foundation. Both of them build a house. Both of them have tragedy strike their life. The difference is the foundation they choose, the effort they put, and the ultimate result. What's the basis for this characterization of whether they're wise or foolish? That's found as Jesus begins to tell the story. The characterization of a wise or fool is whether or not they obey the teachings that Jesus has just given to them on the Sermon on the Mount. To disobey what he has instructed them shows that they are foolish. To obey what he has instructed them shows that they are wise. Now let me make it clear, this is not about salvation. At this point, he's not talking about how do you get saved. You work real hard at it. No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying that once you have become saved, there's a lot of work that goes into it. If you are going to declare to me, Lord, Lord, then you need to live as if you are my subject. You can't live like the rest of the world, live like you used to live, and say that I have given up ownership of my life from myself to you. You are now in charge when we're still living like we are. You see, what happens is the way that we live validates whether or not we are saved. It doesn't make us saved, it just shows that we are. To live the same way that you lived before you were saved raises real questions about whether you were saved in the first place. Wisdom displayed in obedience is a needed discipline for Christ followers. To show that we have a changed mind because of what Christ has done for us, and that changed mind is doing different stuff, is what we need in our lives. In our airplane analogy, we're presented with those multiple stages of where we could choose to make different choices. We could choose just to get a random ticket. We could choose to stop at a different gate. We could choose to get on a plane, whether or not it was our plane or not. And as Christians, we experience the same kind of thing. We're on day to day, on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on a minute basis, we may experience choices that will either take us, continue us on the journey to the destination that we desire to arrive at, or detour us onto a tangent that could take us somewhere else. And the wisdom is to determine which one is the right choice at each of those junctures. To determine that we won't take the wrong turn, we won't go on a tangential path, but we will stay on the direction, the course that God has established for us. You see, it all matters because there's two destinations as well. Our choices matter. The decisions that we make matters. Obedience or disobedience matters. Wisdom and foolishness matters. Who is our foundation upon which we are building our life matters. Where we start matters because there are two destinations. All paths do not lead to the same end. Our world, that has become the theology of our world today. As long as you believe, and as long as you are faithful at what you believe, we will all end up in the same place. There are even Christians who say, Buddhists, it's true for Buddhists because Jesus is going to save them on the sly. Okay? Jesus is still the Savior, but because they've been faithful to what they believe, Jesus is going to offer them forgiveness and grace and salvation because all paths lead to the same place. those other people just don't know that they're on the same path as we are. And if they would, they'd accept Jesus, but Jesus is going to save them anyway. You see, that's the theology of our generation. That's the theology that says because all paths lead in the same direction, all paths end up in the same place, then all morality is equally valid. If we're all going to end up in the same place, we might as well not worry about the moral choices that we make, because as long as we're faithful to whatever we believe, then we're going to end up in the same place anyway. So live however you want to. Just make sure you do it well. If you're going to be a sinner, and that's where you're going to place your faith, just do it with gusto. Because we'll see you later. It's the doctrine of our time. All you have to do is practice what you believe faithfully, whatever it is. But Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. The response to that is Jesus got off a closed mind. It's just not right for him to be so exclusive. He ought to be more inclusive. Well, want to be inclusive? Then go ahead and go to the airport and buy a ticket to anywhere and see if it gets you where you want to go. It won't. And believing just whatever you want to believe will not get you where you want to go. And the two places that are here is one of those is life. Those who follow the narrow way that's hard and difficult and make that investment and really accept Jesus as Lord and live a life that validates that, and because they're a kingdom person who's living a kingdom life, a citizen of the kingdom of God, and really investing as Jesus as their Lord and Master and King of the universe, they experience life. Elsewhere, Jesus says it's life and life to the full. It's not just life eternal, that's a full life. Why? Because we're not having to carry that baggage around that's weighing us down. It's been released and given us a way to move without having that bear us down. But then that wide way, that wide gate, the easy way leads to destruction. And that's pictured for us in this house that in the midst of the torrent, in the midst of the waves, in the midst of the wind, in which the house of the wise person stands strong, we see this other house collapse. And great, awesome, magnificent. It's Hollywood stuff. This is one of those explosions that you see that are really supposed to be the high point of the movie, the climax of the movie. The victor finally wins. Except it's the foolish man's house that collapses, and all of his life lays in shambles. Because he chose to say, I love Jesus, I'm a follower of Jesus, but never put it into practice. Which leads us to the last period. Two choices. You hear this morning, you have two choices. What kind of traveler will you be? What kind of builder will you be? Will you be the one that takes the easy route, that shortcuts things, that says, I'll be a follower of Jesus as long as it doesn't have too many demands, as long as it doesn't cut too much into my life, as long as it really doesn't hurt at all, as long as it's easy As long as God gives me everything I want, I'll follow that way. But once something happens, once something occurs within my life, all bets are off. Because I want the easy way. Or are you going to be a traveler that says, bring it on? Whatever it is, whatever is to come my way, because I'm following Jesus, I'm a kingdom person. I have established my citizenship in heaven, and there is no turning back, there is no turning away, there is no turning to one side or the other. I will not take a detour, I will not take the easy way. I will follow God, and I will be faithful to my commitment to Him. Jesus is where I am heading. He is my way, the only way, and I will follow Him. And let whatever come, because it will not deter me. Do you know that the promises that Jesus gives followers in this life, very few have to do with anything that makes our life really more pleasant, easier? One of the, if we were to lay account of the kinds of promises that Jesus gives, the second highest number of count that we would find is Jesus promises hardship. Jesus promises difficulty. He promises persecution. He promises that following Him will not be easy. It will be costly. But in the cost of that journey, you have the richest rewards to look forward to. Not large bank accounts and fast cars and big homes, but the richness of life in God's presence as His child. Which traveler will you be? I hope that none of you say, I'd like the easy way. My life's just too hard. My life's just too busy. I've got other things. Maybe later on I'll get around to taking Jesus seriously. We are not guaranteed another, for the storms may come, and the winds may blow, and the rains may fall, and the house may collapse. Let's pray. God, in response to the Sermon on the Mount, let our lives be lives that say, I'm willing to take on the challenge. I'm willing to live the kingdom life. I accept the kingdom challenge. I am a kingdom citizen, and I will live for my King. God, make that our heart's burden. In Jesus' name we pray. And the church said. If you're here this morning outside of a relationship with Christ, we want to give you an opportunity to step into relationship with Him, to accept Him as Lord, to say yes to Him being the King, and to begin to live a life that responds to Him as Lord, Lord, in such a way that He doesn't say, I never knew you, but says, welcome home, my child. If you need to do that this morning, as the music team leads us in the song of dedication, is ask that you come forward. I'll meet you up front. I'll talk with you about that decision and what it entails. But would you take that step to become part of God's kingdom, God's family, through the sacrifice of Christ? Would you stand as we